My name is Stephen MacArthur. I'm the director here at the MacArthur Museum of Arkansas Military History. Most of you, I think, are on our mailing list, but if you're not and you would like to get contacted about upcoming events, Shane has his business card on the table in the adjacent room. All we ask is you take that card, send him an email. He will have your email on our file, and then we will notify you of upcoming events. I want to recognize a few people. Some of my board members are here, Tim and Ron and Sharon. One of my employees is here, Jessica and Shane, and so I appreciate all of them coming out, and so thank you all again for being here. This program is in conjunction with the wonderful exhibit that we opened back in November of artwork that Thomas Hart Benton did during World War II for the Navy and for Abbott Laboratories. And as preparation for that exhibit, I had the chance about a year and a half ago to travel up to Kansas City to visit the Thomas Hart Benton House and Studio State Historic Site. Okay. It is my pleasure today to welcome our guest. This is her first time to visit Little Rock. Her husband, Zach, is with us, and we appreciate them coming down for that 6-hour drive. I want to focus on that 6-hour drive. Katie Hastert received her BA in American History from the University of Missouri in Kansas City, and she's worked at the Benton House since 2011, so that's 15 years. You have quite a history there. She has a passion for public history, and in her role there at that site, she has progressed from an interpreter to a historian, and now, as of about a year ago? She is now the director of that site. So please join me in welcoming Katie Hastert.
Shorter. All right. So thank you for that introduction, Stephen. If at any point you have a question or you can't hear me, please just let me know. This program is really two different parts. Like Stephen said, we really feel like the home itself is just a great historic artifact in itself. One thing that I'll probably mention again is that everything you'll see is original, which is really special. And for those of you, I always like to kind of ask just by a raise of hands, are all of you or any of you familiar with Benton's art? Have you seen it before? It's okay to admit if you're not sure. Oh, good, most of you, okay. I wasn't sure, when it comes to visiting this site, a lot of times it's about half and half with our visitors. Some people who come in are huge fans of the site, others have literally never seen his art before. A lot of times, though, once they start seeing a few of his paintings around the house or perhaps at another museum, they will start to say, oh yeah, this guy looks familiar. Most American museums have at least one Benton painting, if not a handful. If you're, once again, like Stephen mentioned, if you're ever in Kansas City, the Nelson Atkins Museum of Art has a great collection. And they have so many pieces because he lived there forever that they actually have to switch their pieces out sometimes. So please come visit us. And for the military side, we also have the World War I Memorial. So just another plug for Kansas City if you can visit. But for now, without further ado, I just want to give a little bit of background. He is a pretty iconic 20th century American painter. He really became known during the 1930s Great Depression era, mostly because he was painting everyday people, everyday places. I think at a time the country was really struggling. It was nice to see those things in art. I will fill in a bit more of his art background and development a little bit later on, but by the mid-30s, he's doing incredibly well. He had done 3 murals kind of back to back in the early 30s while he was an artist in New York that really started putting him on the map. The first one was done for the New School for Social Research. That's now at the Met, so next time you're in New York, you can check it out. The second one was done for the Whitney Museum, which had just opened in the early 1930s. And the third mural that thousands, if not millions of people would have seen was done for the 1933 Chicago World's Fair. So I'm sure you can imagine this was huge. World's Fairs, especially back then, were a huge deal. And by the time the fair closed in 1934, he was put on this cover of Time magazine. It was a big issue. It was the first full-color issue of Time ever printed. It was the first time an American painter made it on the cover of the magazine. It was also a holiday issue. It came out on Christmas Eve. If you're going to be in Time, this was a good issue to be in. And Benton, being a Missourian, he started out born in Neosho, Missouri in 1889. He wanted a reason to come back to his home state. So he gets 2 fantastic job offers to move back to Kansas City, or specifically Kansas City, but to Missouri as well. The first one was he became the head of the painting department at the Kansas City Art Institute. The second was he was offered a massive mural commission to do a mural in the state capitol in Jefferson City. He was paid $16,000 to do that mural. This is 1935. Height of the Depression, that was more than the governor was making as an annual salary, to help put it in perspective. They had rented a home in Roanoke neighborhood in Kansas City, where the current historic site is, but they wanted to finally own a home. I mean, they'd been renting all their adult lives in New York. They'd been renting for the first few years in Kansas City. So Rita Benton finally buys this house at 3616 Bellevue, which is the current historic site. And I know I was talking to a few of you before the program started, so I know at least a few of you have seen this in person, and as I like to tell people, it should still look the same, because we don't move things around, just because it is all their original belongings, which is really special. The house is a really neat home. The Roanoke neighborhood is a historic district in Kansas City. Most of the houses were built either in the late 1800s or early 1900s. This one fits right in that big building period. It was done in 1903. It is not a house, like I said, that Benton grew up in. He did not inherit it. He did not have it built. So he buys it in 39, and he stays here until 1975, which is the year he passed away. So for about 36 years of Benton's career, he is living here, he's painting on site, he's helping raise his family. So this is really his main home in his adult life. So like I said, the first half, or as I started to say, the first half of this program is really kind of a tour of the home. For those of you who might not be able to visit or have not seen it yet, it's really kind of a neat way to see the property. The front door, it's made from all local limestone. You'll see that all over the house from different photos I'll share with you. So this is the main entrance. What I love about Benton living there for so long is that he actually created art not just on site, but of the site. So then you have his 1952 Christmas card that shows them on those same front steps, which is really cool. This is my personal favorite. If you're ever there around Christmas time, we actually put a bunch of the Benton's Christmas cards out. So those are kind of fun to look at if you enjoy that kind of thing. The back side of the house, which, this isn't typically a main part of the tour or anything, but I just had to show you. Once again, it's got that stone lower half, the cedar siding shingles on the upper half, and you also get Benton's drawing from that side too. Now, if you are going on a tour with us, we typically bring you into the main home from this side porch right over here. My favorite time of year is spring in this neighborhood. It is gorgeous. We have a really beautiful magnolia tree, so of course I had to share this one. And when you're on the side porch, you get to go in through these double French doors, which is just gorgeous. It's kind of an interesting, eclectic design as far as architecture goes. It's like the very, very end of the Victorian period when this is built, the very beginning kind of the arts and crafts movement in this country. And right when you walk in, there's this big living room. It's a huge open front, kind of front of the house space. It really is all kind of one room that bleeds into each other. The living room is an area of the home that the Bentons would have spent a lot of time in. I always tell people, as we go through this kind of tour, you will see a lot of the furnishings are nothing special. Look at the rugs on the floor. They're nice hand-knotted rugs. Many of them kind of Rita was Tom's wife, kind of bartered to get them thrown in with the home, so to speak. So some of them predate the Bentons living there. And they're a little washed out. They're a little threadbare. They're not pristine. A lot of the furniture you'll see will have slipcovers on them. Those were made by Rita Benton as well. She would repurpose things, reuse things. I always like to reiterate this to people who visit the site because sometimes they come in, they see this fantastic neighborhood full of gorgeous, kind of mansion type homes. And then they walk in, they're like, it's a little shabby, And I always tell people, I'm like, these were two people that had gone through many starving artist years together before he was financially successful. And once he did start to make it, it was during the Great Depression. Like, you never knew if that was going to last. He was one of the few artists that was fortunate to start doing well in the 1930s. And so throughout the rest of their lives, they would reuse things, repurpose things. Rita would sew things herself by hand. And so you'll kind of see that throughout the home in some of the furnishings and just simple items they had. Aside from this, they really liked to entertain a lot. Rita Benton had acted as Tom's business manager starting in New York, where they first met. She continues doing that in Kansas City. So if you wanted to buy a Benton painting and there wasn't an exhibit going on somewhere else, like at another gallery, you could actually come to Kansas City. Rita Benton would show you around their home, and you could potentially buy a painting off the wall and take it home with you. So not a bad way to do business. So you'll see Benton art hanging all over in the backgrounds as, and that would have been as they had it when Rita sold paintings and Tom did new ones throughout their lives. Now, the next room that you would go in, you can kind of see the other end of the living room back in the distance, is the foyer. So like I said, that side porch, we did not go in the main entrance, but this is the lovely foyer. It's a huge open space. Right when you walk in, there's this big fireplace. The stairs that go to the second floor wrap around this, which is a really interesting feature, and I've actually got a really cool shot of it a little bit later in this program. So you've got this kind of way to heat the center of the home in spite of it being really open. If any of you have homes from around this era, you know it is not a typical layout or design to have such an open floor plan for that period. So I think having a way to get some heat right in the center of the home, the bricks would warm up if you had a nice fire going, that would be really beneficial for this house. And I know that from freezing there every winter, so. The side that you couldn't see, there's some really gorgeous leaded glass windows on either side of the front door. Their daughter, Jessie, when she was about 14 or 15, young teenager, was allowed to paint them, which is hard to imagine. Like, sure, honey, go paint the leaded glass windows. But I guess growing up in an artist's home had its perks. So she got to design these. She jokingly later called this her Baroque period, because she was listening to some Christmas music. She had, did some like angels and saints and design like that on the windows. But what cracks me up is apparently, being a typical teenager, Jessie got bored and did not finish one of the windows, as you can see from these photographs. One window, every single pane of glass is painted. And if you look on the larger window that's unfinished, on the bottom two horizontal panes, you can see she signed it Jessie Benton. So it was like, okay, I'm signing this, I'm officially done. But really, Tom and Rita encouraged their kids to try things like this. Their son, I will talk about in a little bit more, TP actually later played flute professionally. He played in the Boston Symphony, quartets, trios. Actually, during World War II, he played in MacArthur's personal band toward the end of the war. So it paid off for him to have that kind of talent. So he kind of inherited some of their musical interest. They had a very musical home life. You see music appear as a theme in Benton's art quite often. And Jessie, their daughter, also played guitar. She was very into the 1950s and 60s early folk scene. And as you can see, also did experiment a bit with painting too. And then the next, or one of the final main rooms on the first floor is their dining room. Beautiful area. It was great for entertaining. Not only did they sell art out of the home, they just enjoyed having people over. It was a really lively home life. They would have neighbors, family, friends, colleagues. Sometimes Tom's old art students would come over. Rita but liked to give them a nice meal whenever she could. I think she remembered what it was like to be a starving artist and not always being able to afford your next meal, or at least not much of one. And so she would host. As long as you didn't bother Benton while he was out in the studio all day, every day, he would come in, have a bourbon late afternoon, early evening, talk to people, whoever was over that night. Rita really enjoyed cooking. She was Italian. She'd actually immigrated to the United States when she was a girl. And then she and Tom, as I kind of hinted at earlier, met as young adults in New York. But she was known for making some of her traditional family recipes. So if you ever visit the house, you can actually take one of her spaghetti recipes. They're on the kitchen counter. So we like sharing that one because that was one of her favorites to make for their family and friends. So this room, aside from, along with, I should say, the living room, would have been an area they spent a lot of time with, their friends and family and everyone. And finally, kind of the last main room on the first floor is the kitchen. And this kitchen gives people a lot of people flashbacks. They obviously updated a few elements like the Formica countertops and things like that. Rita splurged. She didn't splurge on a lot of things, but she did give herself a dishwasher, as you can see. And this is an early one from 1965, but I guess if you're making dinner for a lot of people, you deserve it. So, but she, was known for, during interviews, they would talk about how she loved to cook for people. And so some of her recipes were printed in magazines and articles throughout their lives together, which is kind of fun. So we have found several of those over the years. Now, this is the shot I was talking about. So that is the big fireplace I showed all of you in the foyer, and this is looking down from the second floor. So the stairs wind around this big fireplace in the center of the home, and it's so open, which, once again, incredibly rare for that era. But it's just a really neat place to kind of look down and peer into the second floor right there, so I had to share that with all of you. But the very first bedroom you get to at the top of those steps would be their son's bedroom. Now, I called him TP. That stood for Thomas Piacenza Benton. Kind of a mouthful for a little kid, so they always use his initials as a nickname. And he was close to 13 by the time they purchased this house finally. So he really only lived here for his teenage years, because as I mentioned earlier on, by the time he turns 18, it is toward the end of World War II. So he joined the army like many kids his age were doing. This jokingly became called the messy room. I have literally read our letters in our archives where Tom references it. He's like, well, I couldn't find that in the messy room. I've got to go back and look again. Now, it doesn't look insanely messy from this photo, but all the shelves have stacks of old magazines, a lot of TP's old sheet music, things like that are kind of piled up around in there, things they wanted to hold on to and just really didn't know where else to put it. So this kind of became later like a catch-all room after TP moved out. Then down a short little hallway, there is a very small room that we like to refer to as Tom's room. Now, initially, I think this really would have been like a spare bedroom. It's the smallest room on the second floor, and they didn't necessarily need it because they just had 2 children. However, Tom loved to go up to this room. It's small, cozy, it's quiet, so he would read in there sometimes in the afternoons if he was taking a break. He would go in there in the evenings to go relax at the end of the day, read, do a little research sometimes, and you can see, because of that, a lot of his everyday things. Like his hat is hanging on one of the bedposts. In this picture, because it's farther back, it's a little harder to see, but his glasses are next to the chair he liked to read in. So it's like he just took off his glasses one last time after reading before bed. And what's kind of interesting is on the second floor, there is not a lot of rhyme or reason to how the books are organized on the second floor. Pretty much every room up there has books in it. But the one thing that we have kind of noticed is Benton's room has most of the art books in it. I'm assuming just so it'd be easier for him to find references, look things up. And one thing I have to give him credit for, whether you love his art, don't like it, I think you'll come away from this knowing that he really had a deep appreciation for art and a really deep technical understanding of art. And the reason I bring that up is those books range from Japanese porcelain to Native American art to Renaissance art. I mean, just all over the place. He just had wide-ranging interests within the art world as well as, his own modern art techniques and things like that. The next bedroom on the second floor was their daughter Jessie's, and as I like to tell people, she got the nice big room. So unlike her brother, Jessie really did grow up here. She was actually born the year they purchased this house in 1939, so this was definitely more her childhood home. Every year as a birthday present, Tom would paint some sort of birthday portrait for Jessie. You can see one kind of in the distance next to one of her windows. It's called Jessie with Guitar. But what I love about those is that he would always incorporate a clue that tells you Jessie's age. So in this one, where if you can tell she's playing guitar, there are 17 frets on the neck of the guitar for her 17th birthday. When she was 8, there were animals in the portrait with her. When she was 12, there were 12 paintbrushes. So it was something different every year, and usually something she really enjoyed that year too. So I always tell people I wish they would do a Jessie birthday book some year. Just it would be fun to see some of the ones I haven't even seen before. And then this little landing stage. So that railing is right where I took that picture of the staircase. looking down into the foyer. So this area, we call it the study. It's really just kind of a common room for all the main bedrooms on the second floor. It has all their books. Benton was a voracious reader. There's history, which he loved to incorporate American history into his art sometimes. There's philosophy, classics. Of course, no house from this era would be complete without hundreds of National Geographic magazines. So like many people, they had decades worth of them stacked up in here. So it is really kind of a fun mix of some things that were very kind of rare for the period, and then other things that almost every family had, at least some of. So I always like to let people look around in this area for just a moment. And then really the last main bedroom or room in general, kind of on the second floor, is the primary bedroom. We like to call it Rita's room because this little space you see in the kind of the back of this photo was really Rita's workspace as well. So it's a lovely space, but I mentioned early on that Rita was really frugal. They were survivors of the Great Depression, not to mention starving artists for many years. And one of her skills was she was an incredibly talented seamstress. In the early years, she actually had a sewing column in Ladies' Home Journal to help bring in some extra income. She designed hats, she painted tiles, made more sellable types of art. So she was incredibly thrifty, and she really helped get them through those very challenging early years. And Benton later said, "I would have been a bum without Rita," which is a direct quote, and I do not doubt it. Now, as I was talking to a couple of you earlier on, I mentioned, I don't want to besmirch Benton's work ethic. He was an incredibly skilled and talented worker and artist. At one point in the 1960s, they were interviewing him, and they were like, well, what hours do you work in the studio, or what days are you out here? And he just goes, daylight. Like, if there was enough light, he was out there working. So it was always really interesting because he certainly was a very hard worker. He treated art like a full-time job. But Rita was the one who was more practical. She was better with business. She was better with sales. And frankly, she was better with people. I mean, Benton could be a little cantankerous sometimes. He didn't shy away from getting in debates with people. So she was the one who really kind of made the business side and just the personal relationships work for them. So she was incredibly important in that aspect. So we always like to talk about her when people visit the home. Now, finally, the second half of the site is, there's two main buildings. It's only 1/3 of an acre. It's a city lot, so it's not huge. But you've got the big home that, of course, we just toured, and then you have the old carriage house. So the right side with the door that's open over there is where they would have originally pulled carriages in, back in 1903. Later, of course, it became the garage for their cars. And then the left side was originally the stable portion and then became Benton's studio. So then we've got this interior photo. What I think is really fun is many times on tours, I can tell the artists versus the people who may not have seen other art studios very often. Some people will walk in and be like, oh, he works in this kind of dingy room, like really? And then artists walk in, they're like, oh, this is a great studio. I've got space to make a mess. You don't care if it's pristine. You've got paint splatters all over the floor. He kind of tacked up boards on the walls and ceiling, called it a day. Never really finished it off or made it look nice. One of the bigger changes he did was actually adding in that large window you can see in this photograph to get that lovely northern light. That used to be where they would lead the horses out, so it used to be a big doorway. But of course, he wanted that lighting to get the consistent light throughout the day while he was out there for hours. And as you can see, he's got little workstations set up all over. So this was really perfect, and then he was able to work on site for, like I said, about 36 years of his career. He could just walk across the driveway and then spend as much time as he wanted out here, rather than renting another space downtown or somewhere else. So without further ado, this kind of leads me to the final portion of the first half, and I just wanted to show all of you one of the historic photos of them inside the studio because I love it. You've got Tom, Rita, they're holding baby Jessie at the time because she was born not long after they moved in, and in the background you can see their beloved dog Jake. I'm sure some of you have had those special animals. Jake the dog appears in many pieces of Benton art, so I had to find one where you could see Jake as well. So the second half, I'll just kind of talk a bit about Benton's process and what transformed him as an artist, excuse me. So Benton did have this traditional art school background. A lot of people are curious if he just kind of was more of an amateur artist that eventually became more successful, but he studied at the Art Institute of Chicago in 1907 to 1908. His father, if any of you kind of know, there's lots of places called Benton in Arkansas, of course, but Benton, Thomas Hart Benton, the senator, was the artist's great-great-uncle. That is who he was named after. By the time Tom Benton, the artist, is born in 1889, that is still a very well-known name in Missouri. It's still a well-known family. And Tom's own father was also a very successful lawyer in southwestern Missouri, where Tom grew up as a kid. And then his dad was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives when Tom was a child. So I'm sure you can imagine. Coming from this background, his father had high hopes that he would go to law school and go into politics. And he knew from a young age that he had far more interest in art. So when he is 18, like I said, around 1907, he is finally allowed to go to the Art Institute of Chicago. That is where he does this drawing of the girl. It's just a classroom study he does while he's a student there. And then after just a year and a half in Chicago, he thinks he is now ready to go study in Paris. Nothing like the arrogance of youth, right? Like, I've learned everything I possibly can here. I'm ready for Paris. And he went to the Académie Julian. I will be honest, he was not a great art student. He found art classes a little tedious. Some days he would ditch class. He would do his own sketches in the Louvre. He'd experiment with styles that were popular at the time. He tried things like Impressionism, Pointillism, Cubism. He jokingly said later on, I tried every cockeyed ism there was. So I will show you a couple other examples, but one we have right here on the page is called Bubbles from around 1916 or so. You would never, for those of you, I know quite a good number of you are already familiar with Benton. For those of you who are familiar with his later art, or the art that made him famous, I should say, you would never see this in a museum and think Thomas Hart Benton did that. So he really did experiment a lot as a young artist, kind of trying to, struggling to try to figure out what worked for him and what didn't. I mean, I feel like every artist has to go through that, right? But he comes back from Paris, and he is living in New York City by 1912. I think he felt he'd have to go there to start building up his name and reputation here in the US. And after being there, kind of struggling with things for a while, World War I breaks out. And he says, I felt like I was going to get drafted, so I'd rather choose where I go. So he signed up for the Navy. At the Navy, they kind of got wind of the fact that he was an artist, and they decided to use that to his advantage. So this is a quote from his autobiography, but what I found really interesting is he said that joining the Navy was the most important thing that so far I had ever done for myself as an artist, and that is including all of his time in Chicago and Paris, his early years in New York. I think it was because if you look at, or if you read the quote, what he decided to do, or what they had him do, was he had to draw the ships. At the time in World War I, they were using camouflage, which you can see on the ships. Some of you may be aware of that. It was kind of a nice way that helped the ships almost kind of disappear when they were farther out on the horizon. And this was something that was really pretty exclusive to World War I, because by World War II, sonar was, much more available. So that kind of made this camouflage for the ships obsolete. But Benton could paint the ships that were in Norfolk, and then he also drew images and filled out these reports for other nations' ships as well, so they knew what Friendly and others looked like. So I find that really interesting, but I think he says that this is the most important thing he did for himself as an artist, because he finally had to kind of throw out all those schools of art that he was experimenting with and finally paint what was right in front of him, or draw what was right in front of him again. So that is why this was just kind of a transformative experience for him at that point. So this is another great quote. He was a very quotable artist. The more you read of Benton's work, you see that. But he wanted to create a common art for the common man is how he liked to phrase it. It was kind of his personal mantra. And like I mentioned earlier, I think that's why he was so wildly popular during the 1930s Depression era. But he really wanted to showcase, get rid of these, European schools of art that a lot of American painters and artists were trying to emulate, and see what he could find in the United States that appealed to him or other people. And I love these two kind of contrasting examples. One is a very urban scene, another is more of a rural scene, both of which I consider just iconic examples of Benton's art. So the way Benton would start his process was he said he wanted to, kind of experience these different regions. A lot of people consider him almost exclusively a Midwestern artist. I always like to tell visitors, that sells him a little short. He traveled extensively across the United States and sketched the entire way. So these trips could last anywhere from a week, sometimes up to a few months, depending on if he was getting good material, if his money was lasting, things like that. So, of course, I had to put in one from Arkansas just for you guys to enjoy, but he traveled all over. The camp meeting, I believe, was from one in the Deep South. And this is, once again, a quote from his autobiography where he talks about this urge to travel and just see as much of the United States as he could. So once he is back at home, after filling up sketchbooks on these trips, he would pick a scene he wanted to work with and take a little artistic license. He'd rearrange things to get the nice rhythm, the movement, the organization. Benton was all about what he liked to call the grand design. And once he had something planned out on paper, the next major step was to make a maquette. And what I tried to find is a good example of a photo where you can kind of see that three-dimensional look. So the maquettes are actually, in Benton's case, clay models, where he would literally sculpt his entire painting before putting a brush to canvas. And I find this just incredible. We actually have a few great examples of them in the Benton home, in the studio as well. So if you're ever visiting, I will absolutely show those to you. But it's just mind-blowing that he was able to sculpt as well. I mean, that is a completely different medium. It is not something that all painters can do. Benton, as I kind of hinted at, as an earlier, younger artist, he had struggled with figuring out his depth, his perspective. He was really just kind of all over the place as far as style went. He comes across this technique in 1919 that's attributed to some Renaissance artists like Tintoretto. He decides to give this a try, and he finds it so useful that he would use this from 1919 up until his death in 1975. So for the vast majority of his career, he was literally making these sculptures for all of his paintings and murals. So I just wanted to show you that so you can appreciate just the sheer amount of work that went into some of these. After the models were done, he would usually do a couple examples of, or I should say studies. One would be a grayscale study in black and white. Another would be a small color study. So I had to show one of his, most prominent paintings. It's called Persephone. That one's at the Nelson Atkins. But the reason I wanted to show you this one is because we have a really nice example of the study version as well. You don't always see both like you can side by side. In the studies, it was really to figure out the color palette he wanted to use. It was also to decide if he wanted to make any last-minute changes. The studies were also usually quite a bit smaller than the final version would be. And once he had kind of worked out those final decisions, the final kinks in it, then he would go to the full-size canvas or panel, redraw everything up to scale, and then finally paint it. And I love in this one, you can see some minor differences. You can see in the study, the man is a little bit younger. The final version is a little bit older. This is based on the Greek myth. But he would do that a few times, kind of these retellings, and put them in modern American settings, which is also really fun. Murals were just an absolutely huge part of Benton's career. He actually said murals were the highest form of art because they are public art. You don't have to be wealthy to own them or go to a museum to see them. You could go shopping downtown. There was a mural in a department store in downtown Kansas City that Benton did. It was around for over 50 years. This one is a portion of the mural he did in the state capitol in Jefferson City in Missouri. But like I said, I love this quote, where you can include more stuff in them. He was always a little kind of sarcastic at times, but he truly did think that Benton, murals were the highest form of art because they were public art. He loved the idea of people being able to enjoy them while they were out, and about. Because for so much of history, art was either for churches or the elite. They weren't often enjoyed as much publicly or privately. This is a portion, I should say, of America today. Benton was not always beloved. A lot of times we look at him with more fondness now. We've got the hindsight. We can appreciate his place in history at this point. But I always tell people, every artist goes through these phases where they might have high points in their career, they might have low points where they're not as beloved as they were at some other point. But I love this quote. It really captures Benton's view and also just the United States. So I just had to share that with you. But Benton did about 15 or so murals. It kind of depends on how you count them. Some of them almost look more like regular paintings, but we consider them a mural because they are done for a specific location. So like I said, a huge part of his career and something that he felt really passionate about, especially during the Great Depression. And then one other way Benton made art accessible to people who were interested was by making lithographs. Lithographs, for anyone who might not be aware, are their own art form. They're these prints that are usually done in a numbered edition. Benton started doing his experimenting with lithographs in the 1920s, but he really got going in them in 1934 when he started working with the Associated American Artists. You can see from this ad, which I just love from Scribner's, that you could order lithographs from these well-known artists, in this case, over 53, well-known American artists of the day, and pay $5 a piece. So you could have art from a big-name artist in your home without paying the price of a massive painting of his. So Benton loved the idea of making art accessible. He loved the idea of making art relatable. I certainly think he achieved those things. But as I mentioned earlier, he also, loved to debate and could be a little cantankerous at times. So whether you like him as a person or not, I do love the aspect of his beliefs in art, that he really was passionate about making art accessible and relatable to people. And then one little known side of Benton's career, which I just wanted to mention because I brought up the maquettes he would do for his paintings and murals, is he also did sculptures, bronzes. They were not a huge part of his career, but it's almost like if he already knows how to sculpt, it's not a stretch for him to do these. My personal favorite is the bust of Rita. This one he did very early on. He made the mold for it very early on when they were first kind of dating. It was cast in the 60s, but it's a really beautiful piece. And you can see kind of some other examples. Another fun one that people in Kansas City enjoy is he did this one in 1970 after the Chiefs won their first Super Bowl. So this is another example of Benton kind of taking an older motif and updating it and putting it in an American setting. So I love that he used this example of, kind of this Etruscan style warriors fighting, which you can see kind of an example of on that old pottery, and then using it instead to showcase American football players, which is really interesting. So just kind of a fun way of updating maybe, or showcasing his knowledge of art history and updating it for an American audience. And then just to wrap up, I talk about Tom and Rita kind of both almost equally. So I would be remiss if I did not share this portrait with them. Benton did this between 1922 and 1924. They were married in 1922. You can tell he was feeling quite good about himself at this point. You get to paint yourself how you want to be remembered, I guess, but it's also a great example of an earlier Benton painting when he had finally started to develop that very distinctive style of his. So that really emerges in the late teens and the early 1920s, right around the time that he finished up his naval service and right around the time he started making those maquettes. So that was 1918 and 1919. So that's when this really distinctive Benton style develops. And just to finish up with kind of his years, this is actually the last self-portrait lithograph, and there's a painting version as well. But that is all I have.